All right, so we're going to start looking at chapter 3 here and kind of talk through this idea of instance variables, what they mean, what it means to be encapsulated, and then look at some kind of practice problems with replit and see where we're at. All right, so we're going to look at the book first with our sections 3.1 through 3.3 and this idea of what's called an instance variable. So we talked about variables before in terms of how we define them and how we manipulate them. An instance variable is part of a class. So every time we have an object, it gets both the methods and it gets the variables that are attached to it. The way that we can see how this works is by looking at the kind of class structure. So I have a public class counter, and then it has this private instant variable called value. And that value is going to be an instance variable. Every time I make a counter object, it gets its own unique value variable that it can manipulate. The first part specifies whether it's public or private. For us, we're going to make them all private. We'll talk why in a minute. And then the data type, which is an int, and then value is the name. This is where kind of the general structure that we just see there, that we'd have this variable attached to some class called counter. All right, you can work through these on your own. What I want to do is look at kind of how these things work. So how we get these values that are set as we start to construct an object. All right. So these ones are looking at counter. We can see that we're accessing this value, right? It's not a parameter and it's not declared in the method. So if an instance variable is declared at the class level, like we just saw, it's kind of like a global variable in Python. It exists in every method, which means every method can access it. Every method can manipulate it. We could also return that value. This is going to allow us access to the things that are in there. Since it's private from a driver, from a client class, you wouldn't be able to actually see that unless you have a getter. So this gives us a value, a copy of the value variable as we're looking through it. All right, you guys will work through these on your own. This is where we're going to specify the methods, and so they go through the bank account class. I'm going to show you a different example in a second. We'll talk about how these values, the variables work and how the methods work to go through them, but you're going to look through this as we kind of go through it on your own. All right, in a constructor, so a constructor again is going to have the same name as our class. So if the class is bank account, it's going to have a constructor public bank account. Often what we'll do is we will set our instance variables in that constructor. So if we have an instance variable that comes in, we would set it as a parameter, and I'll show you again what that looks like here. So for this example, I've defined a class called person, and person has two private instance variables, a social security number and a string with a name. I have a constructor here, and the constructor is going to take two things, the social and then the string for the name. And then what I'm doing is I'm setting my variable. So SSN, you can see it's highlighting in both places. That's that instance variable, and then name gets set to that. When I use that, if I go to my main, I'll see I have person Sam is a new person with the ID 1234, at Social Security, and then name Sam. Now, if I try to actually run this, so sam.ssn, we know it's not a method because there's no parentheses here at the end. That would make it a method. I'm trying to call that instance variable. So when I do that, if I run this, we're going to see that I'll have an error that I wasn't trying to do. No, sorry, this is what I wanted. The private access. So if it's private, that means I can't directly access it from another class, in this case my main method. So what we want to do is we want to allow access to the value of that without allowing direct access. So I'd say public int get SSN, and then I would return SSN, so the social security number. Now when I go back and I run the main, I should hopefully get to see, oh, I didn't change it here. So sam.get the social security number. Run it, and we should see 1234, and there it is. Now, you might be saying like, well, why don't we just, if we want to get to it, why don't I just adjust it here, and instead of making it private, I make it public. So that's going to solve one problem, but open up a bunch more. So now if I just do sam.ssn, it's going to allow access to it, and it's going to print it. The issue is that I have now violated what's called encapsulation, where a class is going to be able to control its own data. I have no way here in my class called person to adjust a social security number. Right? It gets set when you make a person and it shouldn't adjust. But since I've allowed for my instance variable to be public, I could do something like this. I could say sam.ssn equals 4567, and now when I print it and run it, we're going to see is I've actually adjusted that value. So by making it public, I've allowed access to something, and I've allowed functionality, so a change in social security number that I wasn't intending. So in general, what we will do is make our instance variables private. That protects them from outside forces, and we allow access to those that we want to see. But if we make them public, we allow client classes to adjust them, and we may or may not want that functionality. All right. So that's really the big kind of idea with this section, right? You have a class, you have a variable. That variable is accessible everywhere, and the constructor should adjust those pieces. All right, so you're going to read through these on your own and kind of see what those sections are. Go through the self-checks. When you're done with these self-checks and you feel confident on how they work, what you're going to do is you're going to go in start trying to create some classes. So you're going to go back to this document that was pushed out to you. You're going to look at these replit problems. There are no unit tests for this, so you're going to have to look at which ones that you would, you're going to have to look at your output and make sure it does the correct thing. So if I look at exercise 01, I need to change my access here. So as a student, from your view, when I look at chapter 3 exercise 1, all right, it's going to ask you to write the range input class that allows you to enter a value of ranges that's provided in the constructor. All right, I filled mine out, so I have some, mine's a little bit more filled out. You're going to look here in the range input, and what you're going to do is fill in the values. You're going to create a constructor, right? You're going to make it go up, and you're going to make it go down. And then you're going to have the ability to set the max and the min. So you're going to need some variables. You're going to bring those variables in, and then you're going to use your constructor to set them. And think about why I didn't set current temp as a parameter going through it. So you go through that one. You'll go through the second one, which is a light circuit. All right, so you're going to have to write the whole class for this one. You have some methods that are available to you. You need to declare your public class. You need to think about your instance variables, and then you need to basically write the functionality that's here. And then in the main, you're going to create a light circuit object, and then you're going to call some methods as you go through it. If you get through all that and you're happy with your solutions, you're going to go back and you're going to go to Carol. So open up your Carol documents, and in your Carol documents in lab number 5, there is a pair programming project where you have Carol, and Carol has to pick up a pile of beepers and then double those beepers in another pile. So you're going to have a variable that's tracking those values as you're going through it, and I'd prefer that to be an instance variable. All right, when I come back, we will clean everything up and make sure it all makes sense. But your big idea, if you kind of take away what the book is saying, that's great. If you struggle with the replets, that's all right. We'll talk about them when I'm back. And if you get to Carol, that's great, but probably not expected. All right, good luck.